This is our second lecture in our first week, introducing sociology. So we already introduced the course, and now I'm going to reintroduce you to sociology, because if you're in this course, you probably already took a sociology course, but let's just talk about it again. So, in part one of this week's lecture, we'll be talking about sociology as a social science. What does that mean? We're going to talk about what sociology is and what sociology is not. And we will be talking about how sociology approaches social problems. So, sociology is a social science. And what makes something a social science is determined by our methods. So, examples of social sciences include sociology, psychology, and economics. Humanities, on the other hand, are philosophy, English, and history. The difference between these two classifications is that social sciences use the scientific method, and humanities do not. They have their own ways of figuring out the world. So social sciences use the scientific method just like physicists do, just like chemists do, just like biologists do. But we apply the scientific method to studying human beings. Just a reminder, you probably know this, especially from maybe a high school chemistry class or something. The scientific method is a procedure for acquiring knowledge that emphasizes collecting data through observation and experiment. You can do it either through observation or experiment. If researchers are using the scientific method, they're doing science, right? That's what science is. If they are not using the scientific method, they are not doing science, right? That is what makes science science, right? Is the use of the scientific method. It's that simple. But what is the scientific method, you might ask? Here are the steps of the scientific method. Again, you probably are already familiar with this, but let's go over it briefly. And it should be noted that these things don't necessarily have to happen in this exact order, but this is, if you want to do really by the book, perfect, beginning to end science, you would do them in this order. Let me know if you have questions regarding that. Literature review is the first thing you want to do in the scientific method. So you want to figure out what has already been said about the topic. You want to know what other scientists have said about it. You want to see what books have been written in that regard. You want to know what is known about the thing. Then you develop your hypothesis. You develop your statement of what you think is going to happen, right? Your, if you want to study, for example, race and ethnicity, you have a hypothesis that young black men are more likely than young white men to be arrested by police. That is a hypothesis, right? That is a provable statement. You can prove that by looking at certain records, if young black men are more likely to be arrested than young white men. Then you determine your variables. What are the if-then statements, right? Your independent and dependent variables. Your independent variable could be being a young black man, independent variable, and then your dependent variable, getting arrested, right? Or being in jail. Then you determine operational definitions. How do we define young black man? Are we including in that mixed race people? Are we including in that African Americans and people who are immigrants from Africa, right? Those are two groups that have different cultural knowledges and are culturally different. What do we mean by young, right? Are we talking about 5-year-olds? Are we talking about 35-year-olds? Or something in between? After we figure out what exactly we mean, we then go out and collect our data. We could observe from sidewalks. We could go to police stations and look at arrest records. We have to figure out what we want to do in that regard. And then we interpret our results. And by doing this, by studying society objectively and scientifically, we are doing social science as opposed to what they do on cable news channels and just saying things that may or may not be true. So let's talk specifically about what sociology is and what sociology is not. Sociology is a science, as I already stated. We have a set of tools for understanding the social world. We have the sociological perspective, which applies. The sociological perspective can be defined in a lot of ways. A way I like to define it is that we are applying the ideas of social science to the observed world, right? So, in sociology, we have determined that, for example, I'm trying to think of something, I'm sorry. Class, there's a relationship between your social class and your likelihood to be imprisoned, right? If you're poor, you're more likely to wind up in jail than a rich person. Well, how do I use that to understand what's happening in my city right now and where police are put on patrol more often, right? There are more active police patrols in poor parts of most cities than there are active police patrols in rich parts of cities, right? And those patrols behave in different ways, right? They have different modes of behaving. And I can use what we've discovered in the discipline of sociology to understand those behaviors. That's one example. We also have our research methods, which are other tools. So tools like surveys, ethnography, content analysis, statistical analysis. These are the tools in our toolbox for measuring society. This is what sociology is all about. If we didn't have these tools, we would, again, just be making up stuff and shouting loud things like our uncles at Thanksgiving. Sociology is not a philosophy. Well, we might have certain philosophical precepts that we follow in sociology, but so does a chemist, right? A chemist, philosophically, as a scientist, does not make up data. A chemist follows certain procedures that will help the science go better. In that way, we're kind of a philosophy, but we are scientists. We measure social reality, and we determine what social reality is. We do not just think things up, right? We do not just make up what we think is happening about the social world. When a sociologist makes a statement, they should be able to back that statement up with scientific data, and that is a big difference. Sociology is not a political party. We observe the social world, and it should not be defined by politics. Sociologists conduct their research in an objective fashion. When we are doing our research, we are supposed to take our political attitudes and put them aside when we are analyzing our data. With that said, there are certain political tendencies among sociologists, but we do not let our political beliefs drive our science. As sociologists, when we are acting as sociologists, we are to act as scientists first. Sociology is not anti-religious or pro-religious. We are neutral in that regard. When sociologists study religion, we attempt to understand what people believe and why they believe it. But we are not interested in if people are correct. We are interested in what people believe, right? So, if you believe in God and if you believe in heaven and hell, we want to know why you believe that and how that impacts your behavior. We are not interested, quite frankly, in whether there is really a God, a heaven, or a hell, right? If there's a group of people that worships a big blue chair and thinks that that big blue chair created the world, right? We want to understand why they believe that, right? Yeah. And part 3, how sociology approaches social problems. This is interesting. Different sociologists have different motivations for doing their research. Some researchers believe that we should do our research because we want to understand everything that's happening in our social world. This is called value-free sociology. If a sociologist takes a neutral stance and just wants to study the world as it exists aside from any belief structure whatsoever. Other sociologists want to do their research to support or create social change. This is Marx's concept of praxis. Karl Marx believed that we should conduct social research to try to make the world a better place. With that said, when sociologists do engage in praxis, when they do try to conduct social research to make the world a better place, they almost always attempt to conduct value-free sociology. And the way we do that is when we might use the idea of praxis to choose which topic we're studying, right? We might see injustice in the Latino community, in how immigration laws are enforced. So that's why we choose that topic to study. But when we're gathering our data, we try to observe social reality as it is, aside from our political motivations, right? And then after we analyze our data, we write our paper up, then we may use our research and introduce it to policymakers, to audiences that might be interested in our research so that they can then go do political things with it, right? So in that way, you can engage in both praxis and value-free sociology. With that said, those people that are really hard and strong on value-free sociology, that don't think that sociologists should be political, they just don't do that second thing, right? They just do the research and they let that be the thing. We will be addressing a number of social problems in this course. We will be addressing drug abuse, child abuse, mass shootings, sexism, racism, issues with technology that technology are creating, climate change, heterosexism. We'll be talking about all of these things. While we're talking about these things, remember that there are people in our discussions that might have, trauma associated with those discussions. If you have, this is your fair warning though, I suppose. If you are somebody that has emotional problems with these issues, watch out and get ready and prepare yourself for that. Yeah, but these are really interesting topics. And these are topics that people like to talk about. I mean, they're hard to talk about, but they are very fulfilling to talk about. So with that said, let's get ready for our first discussions. and I will see you soon.